Hello, my name is Selena, and I'm a part of the Let's Discuss A Course in Miracles webinar team at the Foundation for Inner Peace. The mission of the Foundation for Inner Peace is to publish, distribute, and discuss A Course in Miracles. And we are holding these Let's Discuss online webinars as an expression of our vision of extending love through A Course in Miracles teachings. We're so happy you're joining us here for the next 90 minutes. Today's Let's Discuss webinar is being brought to you as a pre-recorded event. Before I introduce today's subject and our guest, I invite you to join in prayer. From the text, chapter 2, A Course in Miracles tells us that we can do much on behalf of our own healing and that of others if we think of our situations in this way. I am here only to be truly helpful. I am here to represent Him who sent me. I do not have to worry about what to say or what to do, because He who sent me will direct me. I am content to be wherever He wishes, knowing He goes there with me. I will be healed as I let Him teach me to heal. Now, it's time for today's session entitled Friends with Benefits in A Course in Miracles. Are you intrigued? More than just a catchy title, our journey today will take us into exploring the world of relationships. We'll discuss navigating our own projections while on the spiritual path, what it means to turn special relationships into holy ones, and the role forgiveness plays in it all. It's such a pleasure to have and welcome our guest panelists today who have had lifelong friendships with at least one of the founders of the Foundation for Inner Peace. In this webinar, Foundation President Tam Morgan will be joined by course teachers and authors Carol Howe, Reverend Dr. Jon Mundy, and Dr. Roger Walsh. Hello, everyone, and welcome to you all.
Yes, welcome to us all. This is kind of like old home day, although I don't mean that we're all in an old home, but we've all known each other for many, many years. And I'd love to go around and just have each of you say how you got to the course, when you got to the course. And I think that's a good start. So we want to start with Carol.
All righty. Well, I was acquainted with the course nearly 46 years ago, actually 46 years ago this month. We had a house guest stay with us, an interesting metaphysical type, and he sent us as a house present and as a thank you afterwards, a subscription to New Realities magazine. The very first edition that we received as his gift was the version that had Judy's interview about the course in it. No accident there. No. So I read the article and loved it. And it included the introduction to the course. And I read that and I was just blown away. I thought, whatever this is, I need to have. And I ordered it right away. Well, apparently a lot of people ordered it right away after that article. So I had to wait for the second printing. So it was in late July, early August of that year, 1977. It arrived, and nothing could possibly be more wonderful than that set of books that I found out about.
Okay, in a bit, I'm going to want to hear also how you each met my mother and the founders, any of the founders of the Foundation for Inner Peace. So, Jon.
Well, do you want us to do that at the same time as telling you about to the course, or later?
We don't have to. We can go back around. It'll come out, I think. We'll be casual.
Okay.
I'm just calling you according to where you are on my screen.
Well, I met Helen and Bill both in 1973 at a conference sponsored by Spiritual Frontiers Fellowship. And Hugh Lynn Casey was the keynote speaker. And Bill and Helen actually came to a workshop that I was doing. My first book had just been published called Learning to Die. And I don't believe, I didn't know who was sitting there. Believe me, if I know who was sitting there, it might have changed things a little bit for me. But I was introduced to the two of them at the end of that particular workshop. And they told me that Helen had written, like, I don't think they said A Course in Miracles. I don't remember. I think they said something like an inspirational book. Now, mind you, I had just published a 150-page little book, my first one. And I remember looking at Helen and thinking, isn't that sweet? The little old lady wrote an inspirational book. You know, it's probably got some very good prayers in it or something like that. Little did I know, it's, oh my God. So I'm sure that they met with Hugh Lynn at that point. I wasn't in on that at all, but that was the first meeting.
Had you already heard of A Course in Miracles?
No,
You hadn't even heard of it. Okay.
no, of course not. Well, it wasn't out at all yet.
Right.
And
Okay.
that was 73. Right. So in 74, I wrote a letter that got published in the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology, expressing interest in being in contact with people who were working in the fields of psychotherapy and spirituality. And Bill saw my letter, and he told Helen that he thought it was a call for her to complete the writing of the psychotherapy pamphlet, because Bill and Ken were both after her to complete that. So she agreed that my letter was indeed a call for her to complete the psychotherapy pamphlet. So she completed that in April of 1975. And she called me and she told me she had something for me. I didn't know what she was talking about, but I agreed to go meet with her and Ken and Bill and Father Benedict Rochelle in Ken's little tiny studio apartment in New York City. That was on April 20th, 1975. And they told me about the course and how it came into existence. And Helen gave me the manuscript of the psychotherapy pamphlet. Turned out I only lived a few blocks from there. I was on West 19th, they're on East 17th Street. So it's just a crosstown walk in Manhattan. And I carried that home that night, the manuscript, thinking that maybe the most important thing which ever happened to me just happened, but I didn't know what it was. So then after that, at the end of that, it was agreed that Ken and I would continue to get together to dialogue. And after that, Helen and I got into a relationship as a kind of therapeutic counseling relationship that she had with me. I could tell you some stories about that at another point. That would be going too far at this particular. So that's how it all got started. And I'll turn it over to somebody else.
Thank you. Wait, I have to interrupt 1 second. When you say therapeutic sessions, and I know we'll get into that in a little bit, which one of you were being therapist?
Is there any question about that?
Yeah, there will be.
Well, I mean, clearly it was Helen, you know, I was just, 32 at the time. And,
Just checking.
and I was going through a lot of, well, I understand, but still, Helen was very good as a therapist.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, she really knew how to move right in and to talk to you about, there was no psychoanalysis or anything like that. It was just moving right in, dealing with the issue at hand. And she was really good at helping me dealing with the issue at hand, put that way. All right.
Okay. We'll hear more.
Yeah.
And Roger.
It's interesting to hear that that story about Helen's effectiveness as a therapist, because I never knew her in that role, and I only met her once. But you know, I was more aware of some of the challenges she'd had in her life. So,
Sure.
so it's beautiful to hear that side of her. I was introduced to the course in, I think, late 76, 77 by my late wife, Frances Vaughan. And I opened something part of it and saw the words God, Holy Spirit, and said no thanks, closed it. And that was it as far as I was concerned, except I kept running into people who drop interesting one-liners or insights, and I'd ask, well, where'd you get that? And they'd say, A Course in Miracles. A Course in Miracles. So, but that happened a number of times, kind of, okay. And then I went to a panel at of all places, the American Psychiatric Association, where where Jerry Jampolsky had organized a panel on the course. And one of the people there was on the panel was Bill Thetford, who I didn't know. And I distinctly remember as Bill was talking, this thought coming into my mind, if this guy is interested in the course, I'm going to check it out. And I was like, oh, okay. So I did. And it took me a while to get through my aversion to the Christian language. I'd been inoculated against Christianity in Sunday school, but eventually I made it through, and it rapidly shifted from a painful, an aversive language to an appreciation of its profound beauty. I had the very good fortune of being part of a group which met each morning, which included Jerry Jampolsky and Judy Scotch-Whitchin and Bill and Francis, and that went on for, I don't know, year, maybe 2 years. So I had the very good fortune of being kind of nurtured by some of the people who were most devoted to the course and whose lives have been most directly involved with it and whose lives have been most transformed by it. So I feel very fortunate in that way. And Bill was an inspiration in many ways. My first reaction to getting to know him was he was so quiet and shy. I thought, this guy could use some assertiveness training, but so much for my hubris. But, it came to just appreciate what an extraordinary, gentle, loving soul he was. So I feel very blessed to have had that introduction to the course through those people.
Thank you. Okay, Carol, your turn.
About
About how you met any of the above.
how I met any of the above. I met Bill through a very odd circumstance after I had been a student for a little while, not long at all, less than a year, I think. I got an invitation from some organization, and I don't remember what, saying that Judy Scotch, she wasn't Whitson yet at that stage of the game, she was Judy Scotch, was going to be presenting a lecture at a university over on the west side of Denver. This is back when I still lived here. And it said, oh, and by the way, one of the scribes of this Course in Miracles thing, Bill Thetford, is going to be there too. Well, it's like, well, I wouldn't have missed that for anything in the world, for heaven's sake. So we drove across town, and what the little flyer did not say is they were going to set this up outside. This was early May, and sometimes it's still cold here in early May or chilly at night. And they had an outdoor stage set up. And Judy, of course, is a fabulous presenter. I don't know that there's a soul in the world who can present this material like she can. So, and it indicated Bill would be there, but he was not going to be one of the speakers. So because I did not know it was going to be so cold, I didn't go with a coat. So after I'd been there for a while, I thought, I am about to freeze to death, and I'm just going to have to get up and go inside something. So I got up, left, and there were a lot of people there. There were probably at least 100 chairs set up outside. So I just looked for the first door that I could go inside, opened it up, empty room. Over in one corner was a tall, handsome man that I knew was Bill Thetford. And sure enough, it was. So we had a chance to chat for about 10 minutes or so. And by that time, apparently, I had started something, and pretty soon they ended early, and there was a big mad rush of people in there. So that was the end of that. But it would not be overstating it to say spellbound by Bill's presence. And I was just silent all the way home. And as we had mentioned earlier, I'm rarely silent. So it was like, I just didn't know what to say about this amazing person that I had met. So moving forward a few months, fate arranged that a very good friend of mine who was a Rolfer was going to be in Tiburon for some extra work. So advanced work in his field. So I thought, well, I'm going to just write this Bill Thetford and see if they can meet. That would be wonderful. And of course, I had no address for him except the Foundation for Inner Peace. So I wrote to Bill in care of the Foundation of Inner Peace. I found out later, as an aside, that he was getting all kinds of mail from all sorts of everything. And at this point, he didn't want to have anything to do with this Course in Miracles. And he said, I never opened anybody's letter but yours. So he did open it, and he called me on Halloween afternoon when I'm getting my little kids ready to go out to do their thing. And we had a lovely visit. And I told him my friend was out there and I wanted them to meet. And he said, yes, he'd be happy to meet my friend. And would I be coming out too? And I said, at first, like, well, no, I mean, I'm not used to being following around after basically strange men, who live 1,000 miles away. And I thought about it for a while and I thought, of course I'm going to go out. And my husband was not alarmed because Bill's private life was lived as a gay man, so he wasn't threatened by that arrangement. So off I went and met Bill, and it was like that was the end. And I met Judy at the same time. And at one point, Judy and I were having a visit, and she said, I know why you're here. It's like, oh, good. She said, I bequeath you Bill. Bill needs to be socialized. He's been so involved with all of this for such a long time. He needs to be socialized, and that's now your job. So here is Bill for you to take care of. And well, I couldn't have been more pleased with that assignment. Now, at the same time, the meeting, the everyday meeting at 9 o'clock that Roger was talking about, when I would come out, I was always invited to attend. And at the beginning, it was Roger and Francis and Jerry and Judy and Bob Scutch, since he was the husband at the moment. And Roger, I don't remember if you remember this, but at that point, the meetings, Judy and Bob lived right there on the lake. And then a very short walk later, it was where Jerry lived. And then another very short walk later is where Bill lived. Everybody was kind of in a row. So we were at Judy and Bob's house, and Jerry and Judy started to kind of get into it a little bit. They were kind of sniping at each other about something. And this is the only time I've ever seen Bill do this. He took the book, and we were around like a coffee table thing, and he smashed the book down on the edge of the table, and he said, you two cut it out now or I'm leaving. It was like Bill being very, well, Roger, do you remember that?
I don't. Happily, I don't.
So in any event, just fun little things like that happened in the very beginning, but that's how I inherited Bill. So I would go out and visit Bill, and because it's a very easy run from Denver over to San Francisco, and he would come out and stay with me and my family. So we were enormously blessed to have Bill be part of our family in Denver.
Oh, thank you. Well, that kind of brings us to this silly subject matter of, well, the title, I should say, of this webinar, which is Friends with Benefits. And it's truly about the special relationships that we have in our life. And there seems to be a I'm calling it a misconception that the Course does not condone special relationships, that it actually, we're not supposed to have them. I've gotten a lot of feedback about that. And I answer it in my way, but would love to hear not only what you each have to say about that, but I would say literally the benefits that were brought to your life by knowing any one of these people who brought the Course to all of us and you in particular. So and anyone can talk, or I can go back around, whichever you would rather. Anyone want to go first?
Doesn't matter. Who?
You.
Oh, me.
Sure. Because
I'm
you
sorry.
uttered the first noise.
Was it a hearing? It's interesting to use that word special relationships because that has a special meaning in terms of the Course in Miracles. Essentially, a relationship that you've got work to do in, or that there's problems about, or you healing lessons, forgiveness lessons, that sort of thing. Like a marriage, the marriages are almost inevitably, well, not almost, they're inevitably special relationship. Children, that's a special relationship, etc. I don't recall it being a special relationship with Ken or Bill or Helen, any of them in that sense. Ken very clearly took on the role for me as kind of an older brother, and a very wise older brother who I would go to for, well, first of all, just to learn the course initially. And then Helen, she turned out to be kind of a mother hen, kind of a therapist that she wound up helping me get through several of the romantic or relationship difficulties that I was going through. I think I went through 3 different relationships during the 5 years that I knew Helen. And she helped me through each one of those. So I could talk about some of that if you wanted, but maybe that's not what to do at the moment.
No, it actually is. I
Is
think
it?
people, yeah, I mean, as they say, this is
Okay.
very casual, and whatever comes up, I would like to follow, but I can't imagine
Well-
that people wouldn't be interested to hear, did she use course principles in her therapy? We all know that she was of split mind, with
Right.
inscribed the course and with practicing the course.
But I might add that when Helen was on her helping side, she was very good.
Yeah.
Right. And with me, I was kind of this young guy who was trying to figure out a few things about life. I was a doctoral student at the time, and teaching in the New School University at the time, and also minister of a church in Brooklyn. But well, there was something that happened the very first week I met Helen and Bill. And I had been seeing this lady who will remain nameless. And I had a couple of dates and I didn't want to continue. And this woman in particular got very angry, and she got very, very, very upset. And she started acting out. She started calling me at 2 o'clock in the morning, just let the phone ring to annoy me. So I guess I had to take the phone off the hook before I could go to bed. She came to the building where I was staying. When the guard at the door told her I was not in, she picked up a cup of coffee off of his desk and threw it on him. It gets worse. She was outside my door one day. I was seeing another woman now, and this other woman is with me in my apartment. We're coming out the door, and she's in the hallway, and she physically attacks the other woman. And fortunately, nothing happened. I was able to restrain her. I threw my keys to the other woman, who ran out of the building and went and got in the car and locked herself in the car. But that was pretty severe, this kind of stuff that she was doing. And so I called Helen. I said, Helen already said, help, I'll help. Well, so she said, well, come see me. And now, interesting enough, I always saw Helen in Ken's apartment. I never saw her in her own apartment. Right. But then, as you know, Ken deliberately got an apartment directly across the street, or almost kind of catty-corner across the street from where Helen was. So it made it really easy for the 2 of them to get together. So I went to see Helen, and I was only there for just a few minutes, actually, not very long, probably less than half an hour. And Helen would do this interesting thing with me. When she wanted to make a point, we were sitting fairly close to each other. She reached out and she tapped my knee like that with a finger, right? And she said, this woman needs your help. Leave the phone on the hook, and when she calls, answer the phone. You talk to her. She needs your help. All right. Well, that very night, the phone rang at 2 o'clock in the morning. I got up and I answered it. And we talked until daylight. And forgiveness was all there. She's a friend to this day. All right. Because we don't see each other, but recognize each other's birthdays and calls once in a while to talk, and we've stayed friends over the years. So forgiveness works, healing works. It was just, she just needed attention, and she needed me to respond to her in a positive way. So that was the first of those. And then, but that so I'll tell you one more time, another kind of therapeutic thing. Now it's another relationship. I mean, this is a couple of years later. This is about more like, I don't know, 76 or so, 77. And this time I'm in love. But it's a very impractical situation. She's older than I am. She has children around whom I have no authority. The father of the children is very much the father, playing a dominant role, even though he's, living in another part of the city and all that sort of stuff. But an opportunity comes up for her to move to another state. I won't go into all that, why that was true. And the question came up, am I going to make an offer of some sort here, or, try to move this into a deeper thing, and we're both in love. So we go to see Helen in Ken's apartment. And we were on there for just, again, not very long. And I'll give her a fake name. This is not her name. I'll call her Susan, just to come up with a name. Okay. And she reached out, tapped my knee, and said, Susan should go. Right? Susan should go. I kind of knew that was the reality that we had to face, even though it was a hard pill to swallow. So we're very near Greenwich Village at this point. And Susan and I start walking down through Greenwich Village looking for a place to have dinner. And we pass a psychic in the window, psychics are sitting there in the window, and she says, let's go in and get a reading. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. And she says, come on, let's go in and get a reading. So I said, okay. So we went in, and this psychic starts doing a reading for the two of us. And all of a sudden the psychic stops. And she says, would you come with me into another room? I want to talk to you privately. So we go through these beaded curtains, I push them aside, go into this other room. She says, this woman who's with you, she's got to go. Now, Helen had just said that a half hour earlier. So, I mean, if so, I didn't have enough confirmation on that. Right? Now, one thing I might add about that story, this lady is also still a good friend to this day. Okay, I mean, we never got hooked up in that context, but we know each other. We also share birthdays and stuff. And anyhow, so that was the kind of the way it was in terms of working, but there was never any, as I said, therapy. It was always kind of like, this is what you should do. Right? Very direct, straight on. And I paid attention. And then I might add that once Helen, I didn't see Helen at all during the last 6-8 months of her life, because she would, as you kind of know, it shut down. So after she passed, Ken kind of took over in the same department, helping me get through whatever issues I was going through, plus teaching the course. I'll talk more about Ken at another point. Okay.
Thank you.
John, do you have a sense that Helen was she just spontaneously giving these responses, or was there some sense in which she took a moment to check in and ask for her own guidance?
No, I didn't see her taking time for guidance. I just saw her moving right into doing what she thought she needed to do. All right. Very clear. I might add that most of our relationship was on the phone. It wasn't, actually physically getting together to do things. She did invite me to perform a wedding ceremony for friends of hers. Sidney Lamb, do you all Sidney Lamb? Maybe, right? And his wife. And so I was there for that. The only picture I've taken with Helen was with Sidney Lamb wedding.
It's Susan and Sydney, right?
Pardon?
Wasn't it Susan Lamb?
I think that's right.
Yeah,
Susan and
right.
Sydney. They came to a talk that I did on Cape Cod about 5-6 years ago. It was nice seeing them.
Well, I will add for myself that I only saw Helen asking when she was asked to ask.
Oh.
And, I mean, just around the table in the living room, when they were doing things that were foundation function things, she would sit and ask. When they were disagreeing, when I say they, I mean the group of Helen, Ken, Bill, my mother, in our apartment,
Right.
before they moved to California, and Bob Sketch was not in any of those meetings. But that Helen would, my mother would say, Helen asked, Bill would say, Helen asked.
Oh, right.
And there would be a deliberate asking, but otherwise she was very free with her opinions and what she thought should.
Right.
And what I always found impressive was she would say her opinion, but if she was asked to ask, the answer was not always what her ego would say.
Hmm.
What her ego would say.
I might add that the first person I knew of this list was your mother. And I knew her from about 67, 68. Along in there, she was active with the New York Society for Psychical Research. So was I. She was active in Spiritual Frontiers Fellowship. So was I. She was always having me come over to your house there in New York and Beresford, and watch Uri Geller bin spoons or see the latest in Curlian photography, and I would meet Helen there as well. I can remember several times sitting with Helen at your place.
Did you know when well, I guess you did know because you went to Bill with my mother, but my mother tell you about the course?
I knew about the course before your mother did.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, I was actually, it's very close though. I think
Yeah.
she told me in April, and your mother found out about it at the end of May,
Mhm.
like around Memorial Day. And I thought, well, it was interesting. And here's this about 6 weeks later, someone that I know very well who's very into psychical stuff and parapsychological research and something also meets Helen and Bill and Ken. So that was a nice synchronicity.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
That must have been fun for her to hear that
Yeah.
you had already seen that. Okay, Roger, you answered the question with the question.
Yeah, yeah.
John.
That's not enough.
No, sorry. I just have to tell everyone Roger's just off a silent retreat, so he's rather silent. But with that, I just want to go back, and I don't want to be picky about challenges rather than all the positives, but you were around during a lot of challenges with Bill, with my mother, with Jerry, with Bob, with the whole group, and Francis. And were there any times that you remember in particular where you gathered together to work something out through course principles or through supporting each other?
Well, Francis and I had to do that a lot, of course. Yeah, the advanced teacher, most advanced teacher is a spouse. So that was my special relationship, and it was also a priceless gift. And that having a partner who shares the course is just a priceless gift. And it's interesting that, one of my personal professional interests is in comparative spirituality, and of all the world's spiritual traditions, I have found no other tradition, I'm pretty willing to bet there isn't one, which places so much emphasis on peer relationships. There are emphases on relationships in other traditions, for example, the guru relationship primarily in say Tibetan Buddhism or Hinduism. Certainly the teacher is the sage, the teacher is the tzaddik, whatever the names given to it in different traditions, is widely honored. And Judaism, of course, emphasizes the sanctity of the spousal relationship. But the course is unique in its emphasis on peer relationships. And for Francis and me, it was just we made a commitment at a certain early stage in the relationship that we wanted our relationship to be about serving each other's learning, growth, and awakening, and using that for the welfare and awakening of all. And of course, the course was just invaluable on that, providing so many tools and perspectives, and one of which was just having an emergency an emergency practice available when one or both of us got lost in our egos. And that was, of course, whenever the holiness of your relationship is threatened, the words, first stop and remember how deep is your indebtedness to the other, and then ask for a holy instant. And that was just invaluable. We agreed we would do that. Either of us could ask for a holy instant at any time. And sometimes I would grudgingly agree, but it was amazing how miraculous that practice was together. I mean, it just cut through an awful lot of ego. So, so of course, of the group you mentioned, most of my work by far was with Francis in that sense. There was a run-in Bill and I had at one time around authorship of an article. He had said one thing and forgotten he'd said it, and blah blah blah, and I was not happy, and Bill clearly wanted, had his stance, but clearly wanted to work through this and heal it. And so it was just beautiful to someone, just being with someone who clearly was willing to take a stand and yet really was aiming at the relationship. And I think the primary thing I learned from your mother was a key, just a one line. I mean, there's so many things I learned from her. She really became a sage in her later years, a very evident one. But the line, which if I had to pick one line, or one teaching, I think it was that no matter what the content of a conversation or a dialogue or even an argument, the key goal is to make it a holy relationship. And that, I was an academic. My goal was to win the argument. So this was a radical shift. I should be primarily concerned about the quality of the relationship. So those are some instances which come to mind.
Thank you. Within the theme here of what it means to choose the company you keep, which can be a little confusing in course terms because it's all a projection. And if we are projecting, does it matter if we're keeping company that's negative and difficult or abusive versus company that's focused on something not only just course in common, but course particularly in common? What are the benefits of that?
I would just respond. I don't know who you're aiming at, but I want to put something in here. I think one of the, every path and every teaching has its strengths and its omissions. I think one of the things that the course does is it shifts between relative and absolute without necessarily signaling so. So yeah, at one level, it's all projection, the one mind is projecting us, blah, 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 blah. And then there's the relative of some people create a lot of suffering and some people create a lot of benefit. And and the challenge is how to hold both perspectives at once.
Thank you. Beautiful answer. Carol.
Well, this is actually my favorite topic of all, and I do a vast amount of private counseling with people. And so I find the same thing over and 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 over. And when the Course talks about special relationship, that's not a compliment. It's talking about ego-driven. I want my way. I want something out of it. I want to bolster my own sense of personal self. And we're asked to switch this over to a holy relationship or a healing relationship. And I would say the main goal that allows something to become a holy relationship is to decide what we want to do is to see, first of all, what we're seeing in the other people that we don't like is our mirror image. They're showing us something about ourselves. And without going into a long process that I go into with people, it's like if we can shift our goal as the Course asks us to separate out the time and space stuff, the words and deeds that an ego body, so to speak, is involved with, and which is what we're objecting to, and realize that the presence of us is an entirely different matter. And that real presence of us is only loving, it's only innocent. And so if we're, again, to abbreviate something that's kind of long to very short, is if we in a safe place, if people in a safe place can be led to see that what they don't like in somebody else, oh, they too are engaged with in their own way. And then to see that both parties at any given moment, with the things that they believe, are doing the highest and best of which they are capable at that moment, given whatever has been triggered in them, whatever's going on, and then kind of proceed to, okay, that was the best you could do then. That's over with. It's not, the past is gone. There's no future. Nothing is stored anywhere. And we can now go about the business of turning this into a holy or a healed relationship by deciding, and one person can do this. You don't have to have two people just staring at each other at the same time. It's like one person can do this and both people benefit. If you go, yes, indeed, I can see the words and deeds that are going on. Sometimes those are terrible, but the presence of the person is still innocent and still beloved and still good and still all the other adjectives. It's why the Course says you can't heal yourself alone. You can't sit in your house and go, I'm a wonderful, loving, innocent person, blah, blah, blah. You have to relate with other people that you have thought were not so okay, and be determined that indeed, we're not whitewashing words and deeds, but we're honoring what's the vast and immutable truth about that person. And the more we focus on that, and the more that gets to be kind of the only job in town, it's kind of like relationships cannot help but turn around and be healed, because I'm doing the part that I'm asked to do. And I find that it works all the time.
It brings to mind that, and you all know this, that my mother had a very special relationship with Jerry Jampolsky, and there was a lot of challenges within that relationship. But I remember my mother telling me that she was extremely proud because she felt she had healed it finally. She was free from the specialness of the relationship. It was now a holy relationship, and she had some pride around it. She, a good pat on the back. Finally, I've gotten it. And she told Helen, and Helen's response was, okay, close your eyes for a moment. My mother did. She said, so how do you feel about Jerry being with another woman? And my mother said, I'd rip her eyes out. And Helen said, not quite done yet. And years, I don't know years or months, but some time went by, and Jerry came to my mother and told her that he met someone who was very, very important to him, who ended up being his wife later, Diane, and that he wanted her to meet Diane. And my mother opened the door, Diane came in, they fell into each other's arms and completely felt like sisters. And my mother knew she was done. And that was an enormous shift for her, because they had so much history and past together, Jerry and my mother. So I think that was a good example, but there are probably many, many more examples, just even between the dynamics of Helen and Bill and Ken. that that could show us this. And if anyone has any to share, we'd love to hear it. None to share, huh? Okay. Well, I grew up as an adolescent with them in my home, in my apartment in New York, and I watched from an adolescent perspective, but also from an intuitive adolescent perspective. And I saw a lot of game playing, which is what felt like, that and different factions being created amongst these people who were doing the course. Now, I was very glad that my mother found the course, because it kind of got her off my back with psychic experiments and all of that, and was very grateful for it. And yet, watching some of the dynamics, what I would see happen is that Helen would use Ken to show up Bill on something. And Ken would be so beautifully devotionally solicitous of Helen. He wasn't a speaker back then. He stuttered still a bit and was shy, but anything Helen wanted, he would serve. And Helen would look over at Bill and say, "See, he knows how to treat me," or different little pokes and jabs. And so it created a situation in which then my mother would take care of Bill, because she saw aggression coming towards Bill, and my mother would take care of Bill. And then Helen would be furious at my mother because she blamed at one point my mother bringing Bill to California and taking Bill away from her. And here were all of these typical relationship and even soap operatic issues among them all, as they kept doing their practice, as they continued to do their practice. Now, Helen was the one who actually did the practice the least. But when push came to shove, every time if there was a real problem, she would center in immediately. And she really would, in group, show up in practice. But generally speaking, if it was just a dinner party or something else, there was an awful lot of jabs that went around, and my mother never feeling like she was, good enough for Helen, because Helen was always saying, "You didn't call exactly 4 p.m. You were supposed to call. You missed it by 5 minutes," and these rigid personal stories that got in while this deep growth work was happening. And so I found it fascinating. Made me believe the course even more.
That reminds me of one thing. Speaking of, what we usually think of Helen as being sort of the difficult party in the mix there. One time Bill was at my house, and he and I and maybe 4 other friends had been invited to come over, because there were a few people I had introduced him to in Denver that he really, really enjoyed being with. So I always made sure we had some time to get together. And Bill had made a promise that at noon New York time and 9 o'clock, of course, Pacific time, and an hour later in Denver, that he would call Helen and touch base with her. And every single day, come hell or high water, unless he was speaking someplace and literally not anywhere close to a phone, he would always call Helen. And that timing happened while the half a dozen of us or so were sitting around. And so he says whatever, and then he said, "Helen, I'm going to pass the phone around and everybody can say hello to you." So it went through 2 or 3 people, and Jason, the man that I mentioned, who was out in Tiburon doing the Rolfing training that I wanted to meet Bill in the first place, was there. And as he's listening to her, he's getting this sort of astounded look on his face. And so, which was very noticeable. So he passes it to the one last person or whatever. And then when they hang up, he said, "Bill, I can't believe what I just heard." he said, all of a sudden it was like, and he tried to describe it like sounds that would be like in a huge cathedral or something extremely holy and extremely astonishing and so on. And it was like, it's as if he could hear music and so on as a result of whatever Helen is saying. And he said, I've never heard anything like that. It was kind of like the reality of Helen was coming through. And Bill's response was, yeah, she does that with people sometimes. It's like this amazing spiritual presence just decides to erupt and do whatever. So I think since Helen has the reputation of being certainly the most difficult one in the mix right offhand, to know that yet that real presence of her was the astounding, amazing, eternal, loving presence that's true of all of us. But the fact that it just spontaneously showed up at that particular time somehow made the point that I just made a minute ago. And like the reality of us is just fantastic and amazing. The human being ego part can be a mess, but that doesn't change the truth of any of us. And that seems to be about the most important message we can ever integrate into our being.
Yeah, they definitely made the extraordinary, brought it to the ordinary.
Yeah.
And it, you know, I think practicing the course, it's almost the opposite. You know, we moved to the extraordinary, but they really normalized it and what was going on so much. And I think that that's where Ken's devotional love for Helen, he kept seeing that, kept seeing truly what was that like, and didn't get as involved in the personas as certainly my mother did, as she kept trying to see the light. So, but it's true. And that is what comes through in the course practice. We are all that, we through our humanity and not at our humanity at all. So thank you for bringing that in. John, it looked like you were going to say something about it.
I'm just nodding my head in agreement.
No. And I'm trying to think of some other stories to jog memories of how they got through. Like, Roger, you were in a course group with them, not Helen continuously, but you know, how did they bring back whatever was going on daily? What was your practice in that group with them? Did you just the course? Did you talk about daily situations?
Yeah, the foundational part was reading a lesson, sometimes lesson of the day, sometimes something selected at random. At one phase we were doing just, you know, kind of stick-a-mancy, just opening the book and reading from it. That was the beginning, and then there was usually discussion around the material, and then I think it branched out in a pretty spontaneous way. There was asking, for example, when I was brought to the group by Francis, there was a question, well, should this young whippersnapper be permitted to be an ongoing part of the group? And Bill just closed his eyes for a minute and two and said, yeah, you should stay, Roger. So, okay, well, so that's how it works. Occasionally people came in as guests, Carol, for example. But I think maybe the first, it was an hour long, maybe the first half was specifically related to the material, and then it, you know, branched out in spontaneous ways, I think.
It seems to me like we always read a something. I don't know who decided whether it was a lesson or a passage, and that then would become a springboard for and I can remember in my very earliest days of traveling out there, how kind Roger and Frances were. You know, Frances would take me to lunch. I was the stranger in town, and she was wonderful about incorporating me into that little tiny group. And I don't know if you remember all that, but coming to your house for dinner.
Oh,
So Roger and Frances were a very important and integral part, so to speak, of the little tiny nucleus, so to speak, of the group there in Tiburon. And I'm eternally grateful for that kindness.
Yeah, they emanated kindness
Yes.
and humor.
Yes.
I think that was the a common denominator: high intellect and great humor.
Especially Bill.
What?
yeah, Bill.
Especially Bill.
Especially Bill.
Especially Bill, yes, well said.
Yeah.
Had his own breed for sure. Absolutely.
Bill actually could be possibly the funniest person I ever met in my entire life.
Yeah.
I remember one weekend he came out to Denver, and another couple who he had met and enjoyed. The five of us drove down to Santa Fe in midsummer, because the Santa Fe Opera is apparently second only to the Metropolitan Opera, and Bill was the opera fan of the century. And the five of us drove down, and I don't know if who all knows Hugh and Gail Prather personally, if you've been around them very much.
Sure.
That was the most, but when Bill and Hugh Prather got together,
Oh.
it was absolutely pricelessly hilarious. We didn't stop laughing the entire time we were there. I'm surprised we could even sit through the opera and not make a lot of noise. But the way Bill and Hugh would play off of each other, it's like, it's too bad it was not recorded for posterity, because talk about uplifting. that would certainly, you could not stay in any sort of an unpleasant place when in the midst of that kind of hilarity. And it was hilarious. I just will never forget some of those.
Was it mostly playing puns upon puns, or
Oh,
was it?
yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And Hugh Prather, just even by himself, was an absolutely hysterical fella. In other words, he was very, 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 very funny. So when Bill and Hugh, and sometimes Bill and other people would get together, it was just, the lid would go off. It was so hilarious. I'll never forget that.
Well, I'm going to present some questions here, but I'm going to start with one that's very seen as a bit controversial, because I would love all of your, or any of your impressions about this and perspectives on it. And I'm just going to read it exactly as was written to me. And it's person who sent it in said, especially in light of the catchy webinar title, Friends with Benefits, the question of sex may come up. Obviously, the Blue Book, Foundation for Inner Peace, published Course in Miracles, doesn't mention sex other than to say that physical impulses are misdirected miracle impulses. Beware, however, the text does have the same material, the sex material, that essentially says that the sex should only be, should only be for procreation, and that homosexuality is a pathology. This material contradicts the core course principle that there is no hierarchy of illusions, ignoring the first principle of miracles and playing right into the first law of chaos. Helen herself admitted, as Ken reported, and Robert Perry acknowledges in the ancillary material of the Purple Book, that Helen was never sure if the material was not from her own ego. So this person says, from what I understand, the material was obviously directed at Bill Thetford, as Helen did not approve of his being gay, because Helen was in love with him. So what is your perspective on that, of what Helen heard and didn't put in? And there's been a lot of talk about this. And since you knew the players in all sorts of various ways, what would your response to this be? I have my own as well.
Well, I know when I wrote Bill's biography, the one place where I could never get any information was about some of the people. Bill was basically a bisexual man. In other words, he was as attracted to women as he was to men, but his personal and private life was always with men. So through some contacts I had, I was given some contacts, which I tried to follow up on with some of the men in his life down in San Diego. And either the phone numbers were no longer good. I couldn't ever reach anybody. So I was never able to get feedback from any of those people right offhand. But it seems to me like I would agree that this was some of Helen inserting her notions about this, because if the whole point of the course is about our healing and about the fact that the world of time and space is not the ultimate reality, so to speak, then it seems inconsistent that it would suddenly stick in some rules about you have to do this or can't do this.
Right.
It's never made any sense to me.
No.
And I would come down on the side of Helen probably spilled over into some of that commentary.
I would agree with that thoroughly. It just doesn't fit with the course.
It's very contradictory to all of the main messages. And
No. That's why it wasn't there.
exactly. And it seems to be like when I interviewed Ken for the book, we discussed that as well. In other words, it's like anybody who's really engaged and involved with the course can see that this sort of pops up like an anomaly that doesn't fit with everything else. If the whole point of the course is that this is a projection of our own minds, so to speak, then why would it have much to say about any of the particulars about what it is that our internal thought processes are projecting? It's like, doesn't make sense to me.
I'm interested to hear that Helen herself wondered if it was interpolated, or your wonderful word, Carol, spillover. That's interesting to me because I hadn't heard that before. I haven't gone to the text for some reason or other. It's of course a question that comes up is, to what extent was material colored by the person that came through? And I don't know, but it's interesting that Helen herself raised the question about that material.
It seems to me like you can confuse yourself a lot by reading the text, although I've certainly read it and know what's in it and so on. I don't find it necessarily helpful at all. In other words, if you practice the principles of the course, you're going to get results. And whatever all of the to-do that needs to be discussed in the text is strictly at a time and space ego level. It doesn't seem to be helpful to me.
That was my initial impression. So I'm interested to hear that from you who've dove so much deeper into it.
It's interesting to think about who edited the course.
Right.
And really it's Jesus that's editing it. It's telling Helen, and this doesn't go here. Right.
And
that's why it didn't belong there.
There are parts of that in which, that is a big controversy if one sees it that way, within the course world. I'm going to do this version because this was the unedited version of Jesus versus, well, this was edited. And I usually feel that everything is true. And that ability to be a clear channel is not always completely clear. It's still coming through human form.
Right.
And I know from just things that I've gotten myself, when I've stepped out of my own way completely versus when I reread it or look and say, bring my own intellect into it. And my personal feeling is that, that Helen was in love with Bill. She certainly had nothing in general against homosexuality. Bill built her a room, her and her husband, a room in his Fire Island home, which I don't know how it is now, but Fire Island was a real mecca of gay community in their era. And if she was against homosexuality, she would not have gone weekend after weekend to these things, in love with Bill or not. So it wasn't that, but in my perspective, and this is only my perspective here, it felt like Holy Spirit gave Helen, who was in love with Bill, a gay man, a gift of, in specialness, an activity for several years in private that was their own intimate secret, which was called the Scribing of A Course in Miracles. She didn't wake her husband up to say, Louis, I just heard, please take notes. She didn't, or whatever things came first. She called Bill. And this was her answer to the most intimate relationship she could have with him. Within that, there was still the psychological aspect of she wasn't getting fulfillment physically in what she wanted. And there were pokes and jabs. And even within the scribing, pokes and jabs. But when she was giving the work to the world, the work that she gave to my mother, saying, this is the version that I want you to have to bring to the world, she went over and removed poke and jab, when that's not quite its place, and people reading a different form would say, but that was the word of Jesus and it came through, and what was she doing? This is my personal explanation of this, from knowing Helen, from knowing all the players, and also from myself having gotten out of the way and hearing messages, and seeing what part my own ego muddies versus, oh no, that was completely clear. That I was a little invested in. So I don't know that is the answer. I just know it's how I've come to terms with a lot of those questions. So
keep in mind, Helen was 14 years older than Bill.
yes.
She was a little tiny woman, by normal standards. Bill was a very tall man. He was gay. I mean, she may have been in love with him, but not in any physical way. That's just not practical. I mean, it just.
Wait, when is in love practical?
Well,
What? That doesn't make sense to me.
Well, when you're rational and you,
Who's rational in love?
Yeah, wait, still.
Well, you've got to bring it in there somewhere in order to be happy, and to work things through. It's not all insanity,
Right.
The reason why that whole conversation or about the editing, does this word come out here and does it go over there, is really kind of nuts, because people lose track of the fact that this is material to be practiced in changing your mind, not material to be learned, to go, okay, now I know everything that it says. It's like, who cares if you know everything that it says if you're not putting it into practice? And everything that it asks us to do in terms of the practice is always going to be loving. It's always going to be expanding. It's always going to be what works for everybody concerned. And so continuing to come back, this is a private practice for us to help us change our own programming that got programmed in, before we were 3 years old and we didn't have a functional left brain yet to think. And so if you can see its purpose, and it's kind of hard when it's called A Course in Miracles, we can be forgiven for thinking, well, this is something I'm supposed to learn. And once I've learned all of this, then I can do whatever it is I'm supposed to do. But it's not to be learned, it's to be practiced. And I think that kind of answers a lot of stuff about what addition should one use. Any of them are just fine. If you practice what it says.
As my mother always said, they're not
Right.
additions, they're versions.
Yeah.
She always said to me, they're not additions, they're
Yeah,
just
right.
versions, different versions that, you know, we have several editions. And so she kept saying that to me. But I do think that's true. And it brings up a funny memory for me of my mother having met her third husband, which he was not yet. And when they met, he said, oh yeah, I did, you know, A Course in Miracles in 6 months. I think it was 5 months, whatever. It was I did it very quickly. And she looked at him and said, what are you talking about? Well, sometimes I would do 3 lessons a day. And so I did it and I'm done through it. And I remember her laughing at that and thinking that that was so funny that he thought he was through.
Yeah.
And that's when also she started to say that her group in doing the course, whenever she had a group, like our group was myself and Bob Rosenthal and his wife Emmanuel and Whit and my mother, she always called it the slow learners group because she said such a slow learner and she would never be done. And it's continual, the applied practice. It doesn't just finish because you've read it or done it
Not at
for all the lessons.
In fact, as I encourage the students I work with to go over it and do it because it just keeps getting deeper
Yes.
and more edifying. When you do that, you can't go through this just once. You're only going over the surface. Now let's go back and go to grade 2 and grade 3 and grade 4.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And in the versions and editions and all of that, the other thing that I always found funny, although I understand it, was the one that's called the Bill Thetford version. And and what's the only thing that's funny to me about it, and I understand it because it was pre-edited and this and that, was that Bill didn't use that one. You know, Bill, you know, that's not the one that he supported or used. And so there's so many ironic, funny pieces. And
Right.
I think there's value to anything that anyone's attracted to, any version, as long as they go to the actual practice and the understanding of love. If they want to read the side notes, and that's that, but that's not the one that was given to my mother, the one that, you know, I present here. But so there was another question that I'm going to bring up, is what would the Course, we're talking about all these kind of really intense relationships, what would A Course in Miracles say about the concept of soulmates?
I don't think that of all the times I've read it, I have never even seen the word soulmate in there.
Well, it's there.
It doesn't talk about that.
No.
What we think of as soulmates, I think, would be people who are attracted and, you know, seem to have great affinity for one another and so on. But that, at least in any of my reading of the Course doesn't emphasize that in any way. How about you guys?
No, it's not, it does not show up in the
No,
Course.
it didn't. No. In fact, one of the interesting things, it kind of makes some jabs at marriage, though. It doesn't say that, but that's what's happening. And you read chapter 16 in particular, is real about creating relationships and binding yourself in specialness. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's there.
Tammy, I have to tell you a quick story about Bill and your mother. I mean, there are millions of stories, but this was when I was writing Bill's book. I'm right at the very, very end. And I had a sense all the way through writing this, because there was so much research involved in it. It took a couple of years from start to finish. It was hard to do.
Sure.
But I would get signs from him. So I'm close to the very, very end. And I said, Bill, how do I really, really know that you're really here. Because I had said, what's the name of your book? And he said, well, you'll know when you come to the end. And I said, well, I am practically at the end. I'm busy writing the last chapter. And he said, but you're not yet at the end. And I said, I need a sign that you have been part of this enterprise the whole time. And this is the thought that came into my mind. He said, ask Judy about the plaid dress. It's like, the plaid dress. And it took me 2 or 3 days to write her an email because this is so specific that if she'd written back and said, I don't know anything about a plaid dress, I don't know what I would have done. You know, this is going to be my signal that Bill was really here. That's not what happened. She wrote back and she sent a picture of herself and her baby sister in a red plaid dress. She was 10 years old. Baby sister was like a year old. And it was the first photograph that they had actually had the professional photographer come in and take of those girls together. And that picture had always been a treasure of hers. Mm-hmm. And to get that sign from Bill that was so specific and have her confirm it, I thought, whatever doubt I might have about anything, about guidance from anybody, has just gone out the window.
Well, I just wanted to make extra clear for people listening that you were doing this when Bill was no longer present in body form.
Oh, yeah. It was several years after. Yeah, right. I started about 6 or 7 years after he passed away.
Mm-hmm. And what motivated you to do that?
I simply knew that I had to do that. It was a guidance thing. It was just mine to do. I thought, this man is so amazing. And the course, of course, there's so much of him in there, like there is of Helen and everybody else, that his story just cannot go untold.
And so you gave it such a beautiful title. Do you want to say that?
Oh, yes. Never Forget to Laugh. Because when I asked him, I said, what is the title? This was kind of at the same time. I said, how do I know this is really you talking to me? And I said, what is the title of your book? Because it was in my computer, just as like Memories of Bill or something. And he said, you'll know when you get to the end. And I said, well, I am at the end. I was probably writing the last couple of paragraphs of the last chapter, and the inner voice was, but you're not at the very end yet. It's like, okay, not at the very end. So as I'm just writing whatever I'm inclined to write, the very last sentence, and I'm not trying to contrive the sentence to match whatever he said. I'm just writing, and it says something like, and blah, 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 and never again will we forget to laugh. And it was like, he was right. There it is in the very last sentence.
Yeah. It's so beautiful. And it's also his own little play on the line in the course, and God's son forgot to laugh. So
exactly.
It brought it all together so beautifully.
Exactly.
Yeah, thank you for that. Just love that. There is one other thing I'd like to just bring up for out there, people who might be interested, is, I think we kind of touched on it. What would a holy relationship look like in everyday life in the world of form? And I'm adding, just for them, is it sustainable?
Sure.
Is it complete when you have it? Do you have to ever do work again? I told the story about my mother with Jerry, and she thought it had turned into a holy relationship. There was still another piece missing. Then it really did. But what do you think it looks like, and can it be sustainable?
Well, I suspect it looks like some of the stories we've been told. I think one of the benefits of this group and these discussions has been humanizing the original players and source people for this material. And as you probably know better than anyone, Tammy, there's such a tendency to sacralize and sanctify these people.
Oh, yeah. The ones that I got is, can I touch you? You knew Helen. Can I touch you? You're related to your mother. And now it's been kind of replaced with, can I take a selfie with you? And then they touch me, which is all fine,
Yeah.
but it is. I remember the humans. I remember the humans, and I see and carry with me their truth. They really were.
I think there are some core, really key takeaways in some of the things that have been said here, such as what you were saying, Tammy, about as an adolescent watching them, these very humans having their ego stuff and continuing to practice.
That's right.
And that's probably, I think that's a great definition of a holy relationship.
Right.
And, any fantasy that we're going to get rid of our egos is probably best let go. They quiet, etc. But we remain human, and the myth of the perfect teacher, which is a myth in multiple traditions, may it die a healthy, quick death. There aren't any perfect teachers. They're just people who teach. And as the Course says, we're all students and teachers, and just human ones. So I really think that these stories we've heard have kind of answered the question: is what does a holy relationship look like? It's a relationship in which people are still practicing. One of my meditation teachers, Jack Cornfield, in a 3-month retreat, a friend came to visit and asked, well, how's so-and-so doing? Oh, she's doing great. How's such and such? Oh, he's fine. How's so-and-so? Oh, doing wonderfully. Eventually the friend asked, well, what's the definition of doing well? Oh, it means they haven't quit.
Yeah.
So it's like,
Yeah.
We're in these messy relationships. Our human side keeps coming up, and are we continuing to practice?
Yeah.
And are we calling each other to practice? Do we have emergency techniques to remind each other that what we're really about, etc.? That seems a pretty good definition of a holy relationship to me, the exact ones that have been described.
Right. I once wrote a paper on marriage, and I had all C's, the 12 C's of what I call marriage. And the first one, if the number 1 is there, number 12 will be there. And number 1 was commitment. I'm staying. I'm committed to working on this relationship. Number 12 is contentment. And in between, we've got communication and cooperation and confrontation and all of those other things that are normal in relationships in order to keep it healthy and to keep it working without it falling into not talking to each other, not sharing, all this stuff that can begin to break something apart. Right?
The 12 steps of marriage. I love it.
Yeah.
It also reminds me too of what my mother always said, and what happened in the very beginning with the Course of, make the commitment first, everything else will follow. Exactly.
Number 1 is there. If you're committed,
Yeah.
then you can get through all the confrontation and all the communication and all stuff. And you will be contented in the end.
Yeah.
I think it's also helpful to keep remembering that we tend to grow up believing that somehow all of our words and deeds are kind of stacked up behind us in a big pile someplace, and that I'm experiencing whatever I'm experiencing now because of what happened then. And I spend a great deal of time trying to disabuse people of that idea.
Yes,
It's like, cause and effect is vertical, not horizontal. So if I have issues, if I've got something going on, or if something or someone is difficult right now, don't be looking to what happened when you were 3 or what somebody did at work. It's like, what are the beliefs that are going on in your mind right at this very minute? And you will always find self-sabotage of some kind. And you will always find that believing something that's too small, that's untrue, that's insulting. It's like, whatever it is, it's like, it makes it much simpler if, instead of examining everything in our past, especially for those of us who've lived a long time, to know that the culprit that's getting in the way of my peace of mind is something that's going on in my thought process right now.
Right.
That limits where I have to look, and it makes it much, much easier.
Right.
Well, I kind of lied without knowing it about the last question, because this one kind of comes in beautifully here. And also with your being in touch with Bill while he wasn't here, which was how does the concept of reincarnation play into special and holy relationships as defined by the Course? And you're talking about being in the present.
Exactly.
But the Course does have something to say about reincarnation.
It touches on it, but it doesn't spend any time elaborating about all of that.
Mhm.
In other words, it's like, because if cause and effect are in the same moment, and if there's something that I need to shift or change or improve or release or whatever, it's right now in this moment when that needs to happen. And so whatever happened a long time ago becomes extraneous and irrelevant information.
Mhm.
And we have to think differently about that, because that's not the way we've been taught. You know, because we've been taught I am somehow the victim of a whole bunch of stuff that happened some other time, and what am I going to do about that? So it's like, it's the whole hypothesis that needs to be changed.
Or that, I mean, on a more, I don't know that positive is really the right word, but I'm going to use it on a positive sense of, you meet someone and you feel like you've known them forever. You've known them before, you've known them in a past life. How is that weaved through in the world of Course in Miracles?
You know, I think it's important to note the first word in the section on reincarnation is ultimately. There is no reincarnation. So let's underline the word ultimate. So it doesn't say there's no reincarnation. It says ultimately there's no reincarnation. So reincarnation would be something that happens in space-time within the context of this world. So no doubt there's a lot of evolution that's going on, that's always going on. And no doubt we've had innumerable relationships on a psychic level as well as on a very practical physical level. And that's where the work is. And so we're here to work that out with whomever. Those the special relationships, hopefully being turned toward holy relationships. And we don't know with whom or where or how, but you might somewhere along the way have some pretty good intuitions about that.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And Roger, you have
People I know
anything
in
to
my
add to
life
that?
I say, why? You know, I mean, I had a 10-year relationship once that I still have as well, but I mean, in an intimate kind of way, and I kept going, why? You know, because we were very attracted to each other, but I knew it wasn't going to round up in marriage, and it didn't. But I still wonder why that woman's in my life. There's got to be a really good reason. We must have been together before. That's the only way I can look at it.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's so, to me, continues in the world of form that
Yeah.
anything we think is possible, there's the aliens and there's everything, but where do you want your own consciousness to be? And what do you want to do with it? It's more drama, more, I mean, sure, it's an interesting mind activity, but I think that feeling when you meet someone and you feel like you've known them before,
Yeah.
if in Course terms, of course you have. We're one. You're looking at yourself.
Yeah,
You know?
exactly.
And you can do
Yeah.
many things with that. You can go, oh my God, you're a mirror of me. And now I'm in love with you until I hate you because I find out that, you know, you're too
You're
much.
a mirror of
A
me.
mirror of me.
Right, right, exactly. Exactly. And
Right.
there's so many ways to go with all of these different possibilities and consciousness research, which is extraordinary, but it doesn't mean it's based in the heart.
Hmm.
And the Course is giving us an applied way to practice, to remember being love.
Right.
And I think I'm going to bring this all to a close in a very egoic way, which is I have not been in a room. I feel I'm in a Zoom room with you three and Selena, with three people who still call me Tammy. And that's how I know it's from my
Oh.
childhood, because I've done so much to escape that name, never liking it, and being called Tam. And I don't have much ego in it anymore. If people call me Tammy, I can immediately identify when they knew me from. And so I have to say, I feel reincarnated, kind of a reincarnated experience when I hear you calling me by Tammy. And
We remember when you were just a little girl, just it's like
and I
you
was
were
a little girl. But I will have to say, John, the one thing that just came up when you talk about the difference in age and in height of
Bill and Helen.
Helen and Bill, like my mother was very short and Bob Scutch was very tall. There seemed to be no rational thought
Okay. That's
of,
true.
oh, that's not going to work. And even the age, it's like some things just cross every boundary. And I just feel
Sure.
like the connections that we've each had, they don't have to be rational, and they don't have to be reincarnation, and they don't have to be anything except honoring the love that
There
we're
you go.
feeling and making the choice of what kind of relationship we want to have and what
Right.
we choose to have, whether it's special, whether it's romantic, whether it's anything. We get to choose this, and through the course we get to learn that the greatest relationships are holy when we transcend the ego, the romantic, the everything. So
I do have to say how much I appreciate and honor all the times that those of us have, in the ways we've spent time together, how we've spent time together. I remember all of that and appreciate it absolutely no end. It's been really important. I remember when I first met John and first met Tam, first met
you
Rob.
call me Tammy.
And it was great.
Yeah, I think everyone became an extended family, and it went from tight nucleus to concentric extensions. But it's rare now to find a lot of people who were there with the founders in the beginning and how it affected all of your lives, the founders too, knowing you each, because I know how much they loved you and honored you. So thank you so much for coming and joining this. This has been a special time for me that I really enjoyed tremendously.
Thank you, Tam.
Yeah, such a gift. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tam. Good seeing you.
Yeah. So Selena, to you.
Thank you all so much. We thank our guests for this discussion today, and of course, all of our attendees who are joining us for this important conversation. We hope you stay tuned for next month's web events, which will be announced soon. If you subscribe to our webinar announcements, you will be getting an email soon about it. And additionally, you can always check in on our website's event page. Feel free to email us with your questions or additional feedback at discuss@acim.org. With love and gratitude, thank you for being here, and we look forward to having you again soon. Bye-bye.